This is a story about Christmas Eve, the night the mask slipped and I saw my family for who they truly were. It is a story about a little girl who battles a body that fights her every single day, and the adults who should have protected her but chose instead to become her tormentors. But mostly, it is a story about justice, served cold and calculated by the one person in the room who was truly watching. My name is irrelevant, but my daughter's name is Chloe, and you need to hear what happened to her. If you have ever been falsely accused, if you have ever watched someone you love be mocked for a pain they cannot control, or if you have ever dreamed of the moment where the truth finally silences the lies, then hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Sleep Revenge, because this story is going to take you on a journey from the lowest depths of cruelty to the highest peak of satisfaction. This is the story of how my father's father, a man of few words, delivered the most devastating revenge imaginable. The air on Christmas Eve was biting, the kind of cold that nips at your nose and makes you hurry from the car to the front door. It was supposed to be a night of magic, of sugar cookies and twinkling lights and the warmth of family. But as I unbuckled Chloe from the passenger seat, the anxiety was already beginning to knot in my stomach, a familiar tension that I always carried when I had to bring her around my sister, Valerie. Chloe looked up at me, her eyes tired, shadows pooling beneath them. She offered me a weak smile, the kind of brave face she had learned to put on far too young. "Ready, sweetheart?" I asked, reaching for the wheelchair folded in the back. She nodded, but I could see the effort it took just to sit up straight. Chloe is 12. She has a rare autoimmune condition called juvenile dermatomyositis. It is a mouthful of a diagnosis, but the reality of it is simple and brutal. Her immune system gets confused. Instead of fighting off bacteria or viruses, it attacks her own blood vessels and muscles. It causes chronic inflammation, muscle weakness, and pain that shifts and changes like the weather. Some days are okay. She can walk, she can laugh, she can almost be a normal kid. But other days, the pain is a heavy blanket she cannot throw off, and the weakness in her legs turns steps into mountains. On those days, she needs the wheelchair. It isn't a choice. It isn't a trick. It is her lifeline. We approached the front door of my parents' house. Inside, I could hear the muffled sound of laughter and Christmas music. I took a breath, plastered on a smile, and knocked. My mother answered, her face lighting up with that forced, frantic cheeriness that family gatherings often demand. "You're here, come in, it's freezing." She hugged me, then bent down to hug Chloe, who was still seated in her chair. "How's my favorite granddaughter?" she asked. "Tired, Nana," Chloe whispered. My mother's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of discomfort, before she plastered it back on. "Well, come sit by the fire, that will warm you up." We wheeled into the living room. The tree was magnificent, a towering pine dripping in ornaments collected over 50 years of marriage. The room was warm, smelled of pine needles and roasting turkey. It should have been perfect. And then I saw Valerie. She was standing by the fireplace, a glass of red wine in her hand, watching us enter. She didn't smile. She didn't look concerned. She looked calculating. Her eyes swept over Chloe in the wheelchair, lingering on the wheels, the blanket over her lap, the way Chloe's posture slumped slightly to the left. Valerie's husband, Dave, was checking his phone, oblivious, but Valerie was observing. "Oh," Valerie said, her voice carrying across the room with that sharp, silvery edge she had perfected over the years. "She's in the wheelchair again." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a statement of sympathy. It was an observation, the way you might say, "Oh, she's wearing that old dress again." My jaw tightened instantly. "She needs it today," I said, keeping my voice level, fighting the urge to snap. "Her pain levels are high." Valerie took a slow sip of her wine, her eyes never leaving Chloe. "Non-committal," she murmured, almost to herself. Judgmental. It was a verdict delivered without a trial. I pushed Chloe toward the tree, ignoring my sister. Chloe, bless her heart, grabbed the small sack of wrapped gifts she had brought. Despite the fatigue pulling at her bones, she wanted to participate. She wanted to give. She wheeled herself forward, her thin arms working the rims of the chair. Under the tree, she carefully placed a gift for her cousins, Brandon and Ashley. They were on the couch, two dark-haired teenagers lost in the blue glow of their phones. They didn't look up. They didn't say thank you. They barely acknowledged her existence. Chloe wheeled back, her head lowered slightly. I could feel the humiliation radiating off her, not for herself, but for them. She was always the one trying to bridge the gap, and they were the ones burning the bridge. Dinner was called at 7. The dining room table was a sea of crystal and china. My father sat at the head, my mother at the foot. I helped Chloe position her wheelchair at the side, adjusting the height so she could reach her plate. She looked exhausted just from the transition. The effort of being in a space where she felt scrutinized was draining her faster than the disease. We started eating. The clinking of silverware against plates was loud in the silence that had settled over the table. "So," my father started, trying to break the ice, "how was everyone's year? Any big plans for the new year?" The conversation was stilted, polite, a dance around the elephant in the room. Chloe was quiet, pushing a piece of turkey around her plate. She took a small bite, then put her fork down. Valerie, who was seated directly across from us, noticed. "Not eating much," she remarked. "Not hungry," Chloe looked up, her eyes wide. "Not really," she said softly. "I'm just tired." Valerie set her fork down. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "You're always tired," she said. The tone wasn't kind. It was accusatory. It was an indictment. I felt the heat rise in my chest. I put my hand on Chloe's shoulder, feeling the tremor in her muscles. "That's part of her condition," I said, my voice tight. Valerie tilted her head to the side, a smirk playing on her lips. "Right," she said, raising her free hand and curling her fingers into air quotes. "The condition." I stared at her. I felt the air leave the room. "What is that supposed to mean?" I asked. Valerie shrugged, picking up her wine glass again. "Nothing," she said. "It's just interesting, that's all." "Interesting how?" I pressed. I knew I shouldn't. I knew I should let it go, but I couldn't. This was my daughter. Valerie looked at me, her eyes hard. "It's just interesting that she's always tired, always in pain, always needs special accommodations." She took a sip of wine. "Because she's sick," I hissed through my teeth. "Or," Valerie said, drawing the word out, "because she's learned that acting sick gets her attention." The table went dead silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. My mother looked uncomfortable, staring at her plate. My father looked away out the window. They were doing it again. The thing they always did, staying neutral, staying quiet, hoping that if they ignored the cruelty, it would simply vanish. But silence is complicity. I looked at my parents, begging them with my eyes to step in, but they just shifted in their seats. "Are you seriously suggesting," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief, "that my daughter is faking?" Valerie shrugged. "I'm saying it's convenient," she said. "She gets to skip school sometimes, gets special treatment, gets to sit while everyone else stands. It's very convenient." Chloe's face went red, her lip trembled. She looked down at her plate, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "I'm not faking," she whispered. The sound was so small, so fragile, it broke my heart. Valerie didn't stop. She was on a roll, feeding off the tension, enjoying the power she wielded. "Then why can't you walk today?" she asked Chloe directly. "You walked last week. I saw you at the grocery store. You were walking just fine." Chloe looked up, tears filling her eyes. "Because some days are better than others," I said, answering for her. "That's how her condition works." "Or that's how faking works," Valerie countered smoothly. "Some days she pretends, some days she doesn't." And then the final blow. Brandon, Valerie's 14-year-old son, spoke up. He didn't even look up from his phone. "Yeah," he said, "I think she's faking too. She just wants attention." My mother finally moved. "Brandon," she said weakly. Not firmly, not shutting it down, just a weak, grandmotherly protest. "What?" Brandon said, looking up now, emboldened by his mother's stance. "It's true. She's always complaining, always making everything about her." "She doesn't complain," I snapped. "She is in pain. There is a difference." "Right," chimed in Ashley, Valerie's 16-year-old daughter. She flipped her hair back, looking at Chloe with disdain. "Pain we can't see. Pain that conveniently comes and goes, very believable." "This is enough," I said. My chair scraped loudly against the floor as I stood up. "We are leaving." "No, wait," Brandon said. There was a strange glint in his eyes, a cruel curiosity. He stood up from his chair. He was tall for his age, lanky and loud. He walked over to Chloe's wheelchair. "I want to test something." My blood ran cold. "Test what?" I asked, moving around the table, but he didn't answer. He reached out and grabbed the handles of Chloe's wheelchair. "Stop," Chloe said, panic rising in her voice. "Brandon, stop. If you can really walk, prove it," Brandon said. He yanked the wheelchair backward, away from the table, away from Chloe. Chloe tried to hold on, her fingers grasping the armrests, but he was too strong. The chair rolled away from her. And then, in a moment that will haunt me for the rest of my life, Chloe was left sitting on the floor. She hadn't walked in. She couldn't support herself standing without assistance. The wheelchair was her legs, and he had taken them away. She sat there, vulnerable, exposed, her legs splayed at awkward angles, unable to move. "Walk," Brandon commanded, standing over her. "Right now." "Prove you're not faking." Chloe's eyes filled with tears. "I can't," she sobbed. "Then I guess you're a liar," Ashley said from the table, laughing. Valerie didn't say anything. She didn't stop her son. She just watched, a small, satisfied smile on her face as if this was entertainment. My mother looked horrified, her hand over her mouth, but she didn't move. My father cleared his throat, looking at his shoes, but said nothing. No one moved. I was paralyzed for a second by the sheer audacity, the sheer cruelty of what I was witnessing. But then, instinct took over. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. I opened FaceTime. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Dr. Martinez. It was Christmas Eve. It was 7:30 p.m. No one calls a doctor on Christmas Eve unless it is an emergency. But this was an emergency. It wasn't a medical emergency. It was an emergency of truth. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. The room was dead silent. Everyone was staring at me. Brandon was still looming over Chloe. On the 4th ring, the screen shifted. Dr. Martinez's face appeared. She was in a sweater, clearly at home, a Christmas tree visible in the background. She looked concerned. "Hello, is everything okay? Is Chloe all right?" Her voice was urgent. I turned the phone toward the table. I made sure the camera swept over everyone, Valerie, Brandon, Ashley, my frozen parents, and then finally down to Chloe sitting on the floor, crying with the empty wheelchair a few feet away. "Dr. Martinez," I said, my voice trembling. "I am so sorry to bother you on Christmas Eve, but I need your help." "What is going on?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "My family is accusing Chloe of faking her illness," I said, my voice gaining strength. "They pulled away her wheelchair and told her to walk to prove she isn't lying. Can you please explain to them what is actually happening?" Dr. Martinez's face went hard. The warmth vanished, replaced by a steely, professional fury. "Put me on speaker," she commanded. I tapped the screen. I turned the volume all the way up. Dr. Martinez's voice filled the dining room, echoing off the walls. "This is Dr. Martinez," she announced. "I am Chloe's rheumatologist. Who am I speaking to?" Valerie shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She looked like a deer caught in headlights. I'm her aunt," she stammered. "And you think she's faking?" Dr. Martinez asked. Her tone was ice cold. "I think it's possible," Valerie said, her confidence from moments ago evaporating. "It's suspicious." "Let me be very clear," Dr. Martinez said, enunciating every word perfectly. "Chloe has juvenile dermatomyositis. It is a rare autoimmune disease that causes muscle inflammation, pain, and weakness. It is not a choice. It is not a behavior. It is a pathology. Some days her symptoms are manageable. Some days they are severe. Today is clearly a severe day. She is using a wheelchair because walking causes her significant pain and could cause permanent damage to her inflamed muscles. She is not faking." "But she walked last week," Valerie argued, her voice smaller now. "I saw her." "Because last week was a better day," Dr. Martinez snapped. "That is how chronic illness works. It fluctuates. It is not binary. And the fact that you are questioning a child about her medical reality shows a profound lack of understanding and compassion." Brandon spoke up then, trying to salvage his cruelty. "But how do we know she's not just pretending to be in pain?" Dr. Martinez didn't hesitate. "Because I have run extensive tests," she said, her voice rising. "Blood work, MRIs, muscle biopsies. Chloe's condition is medically documented in thousands of pages of records. Her elevated muscle enzymes, her inflammation markers, the specific patterns of weakness. These are objective facts. It is not something she can fake. It is not something a child can pretend. It is biology." The room was silent. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Dr. Martinez continued, her voice shaking with anger. "What you have done tonight is cruel. You have questioned a sick child's validity. You have physically removed her mobility aid, a piece of medical equipment, not a toy. You have humiliated her in front of her family. This is not just inappropriate. It is harmful. It is abusive." Valerie started to stammer. "We didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," Dr. Martinez cut her off. "You meant every word. And now you are hearing from a medical professional that you were wrong. I hope you will apologize. Goodbye. The screen went black. I lowered the phone. I looked at Valerie. The room was still frozen. Brandon had stepped back from Chloe, looking at his shoes. Ashley stared at the table. Valerie's face was flushed a deep, mottled red. Anything to say? I asked. My voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a hurricane. Valerie looked down. I'm sorry, she whispered. Not to me, I said. To Chloe. Valerie looked at Chloe, who was still on the floor, wiping her eyes. I'm sorry, she mumbled. I was wrong. Brandon and Ashley muttered obligatory apologies, their words hollow and empty. Then my grandfather spoke. He had been silent the entire time. He was a man of 80, a man who had seen war, loss, and the entire breadth of human nature. He sat at the far end of the table, his hands folded. I've seen enough, he said. His voice was raspy but firm. He pushed his chair back and stood up slowly. He walked over to Chloe, stepping around Brandon. He leaned down and gently took Chloe's hand. I'm sorry you had to endure that, he said softly. Chloe looked up at him, her eyes red. It's okay, Grandpa, she whispered. No, he said, straightening up. It is not. He turned his gaze to Valerie. The look in his eyes was terrifying. It was the look of a man who had made a decision. You should be ashamed, he said. I said I was sorry, Valerie said, defensiveness creeping back into her voice. Too late, my grandfather said. He turned to me. Take her home, she needs rest. I nodded. I didn't say another word to my sister or my parents. I walked over, helped Chloe back into her wheelchair, and we left. The drive home was quiet. Chloe fell asleep almost instantly, the emotional trauma draining her completely. I stayed up all night, staring at the ceiling, anger and hurt coursing through my veins. I felt betrayed by my family, but more than that, I felt a fierce, burning pride in my grandfather. He had stood up when no one else did. 3 days later, my grandfather called. His voice was grave. I need to see you, he said. Can you come over? I drove to his house, my mind racing. When I arrived, he was in his study. Papers were spread across the desk. He looked older, tired, but his eyes were sharp. I've made some changes, he said, gesturing to the papers. Changes to what? I asked. My will, he said. He slid a document across the desk. I picked it up, my hands trembling. I read it, and then I read it again. He had removed Valerie entirely. All her inheritance gone. The money she had been counting on, the property, the assets, everything. And in its place, he had set up a massive, irrevocable trust for Chloe. A trust that would cover her medical expenses for the rest of her life, her education, her future, her care. It would give her options. It would give her security. Grandpa, I whispered, looking up. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do, he said, his voice firm. What they did to that little girl was unforgivable. I will not reward cruelty with inheritance. Money is power, and I will not give power to those who abuse the weak. Valerie is going to be furious, I said. Good, he said, a small smile touching his lips. She should be, maybe it will teach her something. He paused, looking out the window at the winter sky. Probably not, he added, but at least Chloe will be taken care of. No matter what happens, Chloe is safe. 6 months later, my grandfather passed away. It was peaceful in his sleep. The grief was heavy, but the work had to be done. The will was read. The reaction was exactly what my grandfather had predicted. Valerie exploded. She screamed. She cried. She accused me of manipulating him. She claimed he wasn't of sound mind. She contested the will. She dragged us into court, determined to get what she thought she deserved. The court reviewed the medical records. They looked at the cognitive tests my grandfather had undergone just weeks before changing the will, tests he had taken specifically to preempt this challenge. Everything proved he was perfectly lucid. He knew exactly what he was doing. The will stood. The judge dismissed Valerie's case with prejudice. She didn't just lose the money, she lost the respect of the court and the last shreds of her dignity. Chloe is 14 now. She is still managing her condition. She still uses her wheelchair on bad days. She still fights through pain that most people cannot see. But she has financial security. She has a trust fund that will cover her medical expenses for life. She will go to college. She will have a future. Valerie doesn't speak to me. She blames me for her lost inheritance. She tells anyone who will listen that I turned our grandfather against her. She never mentions what she did to Chloe. She never takes responsibility. My parents try to stay neutral, inviting us both to holidays. I go, Valerie doesn't, and we are fine with that. Last Christmas, we set a place for Grandpa at the table. Chloe put a flower on his empty plate. I miss Grandpa, she said. Me too, baby, I said. He believed me, Chloe said softly, when nobody else did. Yes, he did, I said, blinking back tears. And he made sure you'd be okay, always. Chloe smiled. It was a genuine smile, the kind that reaches the eyes. I wish I could thank him, she said. I looked at her, strong and brave and beautiful. I think he knows, I said. So tell me, did my grandfather do the right thing? Was cutting Valerie out entirely too harsh a punishment for a few hours of cruelty, or was it the perfect justice for a lifetime of indifference? When you strip away a child's dignity, do you deserve to inherit the family fortune? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, if you believe in karma and the protective power of a grandfather's love, make sure to subscribe to Sleep Revenge for more. Turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of justice. Thank you for listening.